Have you ever wondered how you would survive a night in medieval times when darkness wasn't just the absence of light, but a playground for spirits, witches, and things that had no names? Imagine waking up somewhere in a stone cottage, hearing odd whispers carried by the wind through gaps in the walls, and knowing that somewhere out there, unseen, things were awake that you wished stayed sleeping forever. If you enjoy immersive journeys into history and tales that soothe your mind before sleep, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Your support means everything. This is the story of ordinary medieval folk people like you might have been if born 500 years earlier, who faced every sunset with quiet dread and hushed breath, filling the hours before sleep with rituals, prayers, and sometimes brave fools' laughter. Why did the night terrify so many? Who roamed the shadows outside your door? And how did people seek comfort when the fire burned low and the world outside turned less than friendly? Suddenly, let me share with you a secret that medieval children knew. You were never supposed to sleep alone, not because of bed bugs or simple nightmares, but because medieval belief held that during sleep, your very soul could leave your body, slip into the dark spaces between worlds, and encounter things that might steal your breath, or worse, steal you entirely. How does that compare to the monsters lurking under your bed now? When was the last time you truly felt darkness, not just a turned-off lamp or blackout curtains you can control, but the creeping, velvety night that envelops you whole, making each breath feel borrowed from some unseen force? Your day ends not with Netflix or an alarm on your iPhone, but with the slow, inevitable dwindling of smoky candlelight. As the sun sinks below the horizon, shadows stretch and mingle, climbing walls slick with damp. The stones beneath your bare feet are cold, not the refreshing cold of morning, but the bone-deep cold of something that never knew warmth, something that simply absorbed it from everyone who walked upon it. Moonlight, when it comes, is thin and pale, barely qualified to be called light at all. It squeezes through warped wooden shutters in pale threads, casting patterns like prison bars across your sleeping space. Some nights there is no moon at all, and the darkness becomes complete, absolute, a physical presence you could almost touch. Breathe in deeply now. What do you notice? The scent is a complex layer. Musty hay from the bedding, old sweat from bodies that rarely bathed, a hint of mildew from the stone where moisture weeps regardless of season. Beneath that is something almost sweet, wildflowers from just beyond the walls if you're lucky, if someone gathered them. But mostly you inhale survival itself, the smell of people enduring, of animals sheltering close, of fire struggling against encroaching cold. The cottage creaks and settles constantly. The deep groan of ancient timber, the gentle rasp of wind rubbing insistently against every chink and crack in the stone. Your ears, sharpened by fear and habit, strain to separate the sounds of the living from the sounds of the dead. There's a distant animal, a fox yipping at something beyond the walls, the slither of something small moving through underbrush, goats muttering in a neighboring shed like gossiping crones. Every noise might be a visitor, a wanted or unwanted one, and might be nothing at all. The uncertainty is perhaps worse than any confirmed threat. Touch is a constant reminder of hardship and vulnerability. The scratch of your wool blanket feels rough as uncombed hair, each fiber catching slightly on your skin. The icy slick of water poured from a battered jug makes you flinch. Your fingertips find the uneven grooves of the table where generations carved marks in boredom, fear, or desperation. You can't quite say which. The ground beneath the thin mat is hard and unforgiving, reminding you that comfort is a luxury you cannot afford. Your emotional and spiritual state, it's a thin filament, stretched between each breath. There's a quiet tightness in your chest as the sky goes blacker and blacker. Your throat feels dry despite the water you drank. Your hands unconsciously reach for something, anything to hold. Is tonight the night the spirits come calling? Is tonight the night your soul wanders too far and cannot find its way home? You clutch the wooden cross at your neck, your thumbs circling it obsessively, praying silently as your ancestors taught you generations ago. The prayer becomes a rhythm, a heartbeat, a lifeline. People in medieval homes had no insulation as we understand it. Warmth came from proximity to other bodies, not from technology. You sleep pressed tightly with others, mother, father, siblings, perhaps even strangers, during the brutal winter months when the cost of heating separate spaces was too high. You all listen to the same sounds together, share the same silence, hope collectively that the fire pit won't die out completely. In the darkness, you can feel the breathing of others synchronizing with your own, and this synchronization becomes a form of comfort, a proof of continued existence. The air itself isn't still. Sometimes it's so dense with cold mist you can see your breaths mingle with those around you as you speak. The mist catches what little light exists and seems to glow with its own faint luminescence. Is it truly luminescent, or do your frightened eyes create that effect? Other nights, storms hammer the roof with such force you genuinely wonder if the structure will hold. Water finds its way through despite your efforts, dribbling down walls, and you find yourself fighting off the primal urge to believe that every drop is a phantom footstep, the sound of something wicked drawing closer. Practically speaking, you implement every protection you know. You bank the fire deep into the hearth, ensuring enough coals survive the night to restart flames at dawn. You wrap clothes around the edges of doors and windows, creating barriers, not perfect ones, but barriers nonetheless. You hang herbs above windows and doorways, rosemary for remembrance and protection, lavender for peace, street John's wort because tradition swears it burns witches from a distance. A broken latch isn't just a problem for thieves, it's a weakness, a gaping mouth through which spirits might enter. Every gap, every crack, every imperfection in your shelter becomes a source of anxiety. Superstitions run as deep as the cold itself. Salt is poured beneath the threshold in careful lines, creating boundaries your enemies cannot cross. Iron nails blessed if you can access the priest, unblessed if not are hammered into cracks, their cold metal a shield against supernatural intrusion. Prayers are murmured like nursery rhymes, repeated so often they become mantras, almost losing meaning through repetition, yet somehow maintaining power because of that very repetition. Each ritual is one more layer between you and the unknown, and yet you laugh. Someone always tells a ridiculous story about the neighbor who survived the night because he wore 5 shirts, a kitchen pan on his head, and held a chicken while reciting prayers backwards. The humor is nervous, desperate, and is absolutely necessary. Laughter becomes a weapon against the encroaching darkness, a shield, a blanket warmer than any cloth. Today, you flip on central heating and watch the temperature climb in moments. Your climate control is absolute, your environment your command. Back then, a shared blanket, a dying fire, and the hope you wouldn't be the one the spirit picked tonight was all you possessed. The thermostat is your only guarantee. Prayer was theirs. Would you swap your heating system for that level of faith? Would you truly trade comfort for belief? What does this mean? Perhaps fear makes us inventive. Every comfort we build, whether a modern feather duvet or a medieval prayer, has roots deep in the old, cold, dark. We build our sanctuaries from the same fundamental need to feel safe, to feel warm, to feel like the night has boundaries it cannot cross. The night ticks on, and staying warm is just half the battle. Now, let's see how you'd handle the work that doesn't wait for daylight, the chores, the duties, and the relentless needs of survival itself. In medieval times, night work wasn't about finishing emails or scrolling through messages. It was about genuine, literal survival. Everyone had their nighttime tasks, from tending animals to preparing healing remedies, and yes, sometimes keeping watch for danger. The work didn't stop when the sun set. It just changed form. You hear the chuff of animals in the darkness, cows shuffling their massive frames, a sheep's plaintive bleat echoing off stone, chickens clucking and muttering, disturbed by some imagined shadow or perhaps something real. The air sharpens as you prepare to venture out, mixed now with the musty aroma of straw and livestock, the sour tang of dung mixed with hay, the acrid smell of animal bodies pressed together for warmth. Your skin tingles as you step outside, breath puffing in the chilly air, hands numb as you scatter grain or check the pen for holes and weaknesses. Foxes and fairies both make off with chickens. Or at least that's what people say. Is there a difference between a supernatural thief and a real one in the dark? Does the origin matter when the result is the same, an empty coop and a missed meal? The night brings an orchestra of sounds, boots squelching in mud, the slap of water from the bucket, your own heartbeat thumping loud as a drum as you move through half-lit spaces. Sometimes you sense something watching, but it's just the thick gloom pressing against your skin like a physical force. Your eyes strain to see, creating shapes from shadows, finding threat in innocent darkness. Your thoughts oscillate between practical concerns and deeper dread. Will all the animals be alive? Will anything have broken in or escaped? If I count them now, will they all be here when I count them at dawn? Simultaneously, what if something is waiting in the shadows? What if tonight is the night the stories become real? Sometimes a joke surfaces unbidden. You swear the cow waits for moonrise to deliberately create a mess, that she has a sense of humor and malice both. The work itself is straightforward. Bring water to the trough, check each animal for injury or illness, ensure shelter is sound, look for droppings that indicate sickness, repair whatever damage the day brought. But straightforward doesn't mean simple. Straightforward means rote, means you can do it partly on autopilot, which means your mind is free to wander to darker places. Your hands work while your heart races. You're never fully alone, yet never fully accompanied. Other household members are near, but separated by walls or distance. You're close enough to call for help, far enough that help might take crucial minutes to arrive. This liminal space, alone, but not quite alone, creates its own particular anxiety. The scent of the work is earthy, animal, real. It grounds you, actually, in a way. This is survival. This is necessary. This is what every human who came before you also did. Generations of farmers, shepherds, and villagers stood in darkness checking animals. You're part of a chain stretching backward through time. The thought is both comforting and terrifying, all those people doing this work, and still night terrors persisted. If they couldn't solve the problem through generations, what hope do you have? Would you trade your dishwasher, your refrigerator, your modern agricultural machinery for midnight walks across pitch-black mud, hard in your throat, hoping the only thing waiting in the dark is a hungry cat or a curious deer? What did it mean to be alone at night in the medieval world, and why did no one, absolutely no one, want to sleep alone, especially children? What was the true source of that almost universal prohibition? You curl up beside your family, mother, father, siblings, perhaps that old aunt who snores thunderously enough to shake the walls, possibly a grandparent or younger cousin. There's a comfort in bodies pressed together, layers of scratchy linen, arms thrown awkwardly across each other without apology or self-consciousness. The flicker of firelight paints everyone in shades of gold and amber, faces half in laughter, half already in sleep. In these moments, the fear recedes slightly. The cottage isn't private. Privacy is a concept that doesn't truly exist in your world. Every cough, every sigh, every shifted position is shared. If someone's foot twitches, you know it. If someone whispers secrets to the dark, others overhear. If someone wakes screaming from a nightmare, the entire family jolts alert simultaneously. Privacy is as rare as unspoiled honey, as precious as pure silver, and as impossible to achieve in your living space as stopping the rain. The scent of sweat and bodies, while perhaps unpleasant to modern sensibilities, isn't unwelcome. It's proof of life, proof you're not alone, proof that others are breathing in the darkness alongside you. You hear the gentle shush of breath, the stifled giggle as someone dreams something nonsensical, the occasional snore that becomes almost comforting through repetition. Touch brings something more than physical warmth. It brings safety, the press of a hand in the dark, the brush of a shoulder, the weight of a child leaning against you. These simple contact points become anchors, become proof of reality, become defenses against the abstract terrors of the night. You unconsciously reach out, needing to confirm others are still there, still present, still alive. Emotionally, this togetherness is a necessity, not a choice. Fear of spirits, witches, wild animals, even theft, all of these justify the closeness that medieval people maintained. Children are taught from infancy never to sleep alone. Isolation is dangerous. Exposure to nighttime dangers, a risk not worth taking. Those who sleep alone, the old saying goes, wake haunted if they wake at all. The threat is implicit and explicit simultaneously. Solitude equals vulnerability. Vulnerability equals risk. Risk equals potential death. There's a hierarchy even in sleep. The eldest might get the warmest spot, positioned closest to the dying fire. Children are sandwiched in the middle, physically surrounded by protection. The youngest, the frail, the elderly, they're positioned where hands can reach them, where they can be helped if they cry out. Strangers, if any, share your roof during winter or emergency, are placed farthest from the fire, closest to the cold. This isn't cruelty. It's a practical acknowledgement that some lives are more fragile than others. Humor slips into these tight quarters regularly. Someone complains about a sibling's cold feet. The aunt's snoring is both curse and blessing. Yes, it's loud, but somehow the sound means she's alive and present. Someone cracks a joke about how at least we're all being slowly crushed together, so we're equal in our misery. These jokes matter. They create space for laughter, for lightness, for moments where fear isn't primary. But you'd never trade this closeness for a solitary bed. The thought of sleeping alone, truly alone, with no one else present, creates more anxiety than any amount of physical discomfort. Being separate means being vulnerable. Being separate means being prey. Being separate means your soul might wander without anyone to call it back. Being separate means death, probably, eventually. The practical arrangements are functional. Straw or hay covers the floor, topped with whatever cloth can be spared. Blankets are few, so you layer together, all of you forming a human mass that retains heat. In winter, this arrangement is literally survival. People die alone, isolated. They don't die in family units pressed together. The statistics, unspoken but understood, speak clearly. There's also something about family proximity that addresses psychological needs. The occasional snore, the shift of a body, the knowledge that someone else is present, these become reassurances in the dark. You're not imagining things. You're not alone. You're not in danger, not completely anyway. The presence of others, even sleeping others, becomes a barrier against the worst anxieties. Children, particularly, need this. They're told stories by firelight about what happens to children who sleep alone. The stories are meant as warnings, but they work as nightmares. A demon might take them. A witch might steal their breath. A fairy might swap them with a changeling. These stories serve a purpose. They reinforce the prohibition against solitude, ensuring children will fight against being alone, ensuring families stay together. As you grow older, you learn these stories might not be entirely fabrication. You hear about the neighbor's child who did sleep alone one night, once only, and never again, because something happened, something that wasn't quite explained but was definitely real. You hear about the girl who was taken, or the boy who woke with no memory, or the child whose personality changed after one night of solitude. You never fully verify these stories, but you never quite dismiss them either. Modern privacy is luxury, is right, is almost sacred. Your own bedroom, your own bed, your own space, these are considered normal, healthy, necessary. Back then, solitude wasn't a choice. It was a punishment, potentially a death sentence. The comfort of bodies was your protection against the unknown. Does our modern isolation make us safer or simply more afraid in different ways? Do we share enough anymore, or have we forgotten the power of simple togetherness? Sleep, like life, might be safer and warmer in community than in the privacy and isolation we've come to treasure. But even in a crowd, even surrounded by family, dangers lurked. Some threats didn't care how many slept together. Sickness, spirits, and fate struck, regardless of numbers or proximity. What was it like to fear not just nighttime, but the possibility that nighttime itself might steal someone you love, that sleep might be the last sleep, and you'd wake to find someone simply gone? The fear of death, not just from wolves or sickness, but from things unseen and unexplained, filled the air each night like invisible fog. The village healer said spirits could slip in when you slept, making you sick or worse, and no prayer seemed to stop them. Children wore garlic necklaces to repel the supernatural, though whether the garlic worked or was simply a placebo, no one could say with certainty. Elders placed a drawn iron sword, blessed if possible, above the doorframe, a symbol of protection both spiritual and practical. The smell of burnt herbs was acrid and thick, carrying the weight of desperate anxiety. Rosemary burned in the fire, street John's wort hung in bundles, salt poured in careful lines. When someone fell ill, people muttered with certainty, it was the night spirits. A chill swept through the community, an unexplained breeze in a supposedly closed room. The sound of prayers intensified, became more urgent, more fervent, as if volume and desperation could actually move divine intervention. You've seen it happen. A healthy person one day, feverish the next. Within a week, sometimes within days, they're gone. The illness, they called it witch's breath, or spirit sickness, came without visible cause. No wound, no obvious injury, no explanation. Just fever, confusion, sometimes visions. Some people recovered mysteriously, most didn't. The ones who recovered often weren't quite the same afterward. They'd stare at things no one else could see, start at sounds no one else heard, speak about things they'd experienced during the fever that made no sense. The emotional weight of this uncertainty was crushing. You went to sleep each night wondering, will I wake? Will my child wake? Will the fever return? Will this be the night death comes calling? The anxiety wasn't just personal, it was communal. When one person got sick, everyone held their breath. If one person died, the entire village tightened, became more cautious, added more rituals, more prayers, more protections. The practical response was to strengthen defenses. More prayers meant more protection, or so the logic went. More amulets meant more shields, against supernatural attack. More rituals meant more chances to appease whatever forces were causing the sickness. If one prayer worked sometimes, surely multiple prayers would work more often. This logic led to increasingly elaborate nighttime rituals, to the point where preparing for sleep could take hours. There were also practical measures that blended with supernatural ones. If someone got sick, they were moved slightly away from others, but not completely isolated. Isolation was worse. Instead, they were positioned where they could be watched, where cold cloths could be applied to their fevered skin, where water could be offered when they were lucid enough to drink. The village healer, usually an older woman with knowledge of herbs and experience, would do what she could. Feverfew for fever, willow bark for pain, honey for cough. But underneath these practical measures was always the supernatural interpretation. This illness wasn't just a natural disease, it was a spiritual attack, and so prayers accompanied the practical remedies. Blessings were spoken over the sick person. Sometimes the priest was called if one was available, which wasn't always the case in remote villages. The priest might perform a minor exorcism, might bless the space, might add the weight of ecclesiastical authority to the community's desperate hopes. You learned, over time, that there was no pattern you could discern. Sometimes the prayers worked and the sick person recovered. Sometimes the prayers didn't work and death came anyway. Sometimes the person didn't seem especially religious or protected and they lived anyway. Sometimes someone who was very good, very faithful, very well protected, died swiftly. This randomness was perhaps more terrifying than a clear cause and effect relationship would have been. You couldn't optimize your response. You couldn't guarantee safety through increased devotion or more rituals. The fear of death at night was particularly intense because nighttime was when spirits were most active, most powerful, most likely to move between worlds. A person who took ill during the day might have hours of potential recovery, hours of prayer and healing attempts. But if someone became critically ill at night, there was less you could do. The healer might be asleep elsewhere. The priest might be too distant to reach. You could only watch, pray, and wait for dawn. Some families reported that their sick relatives would call out in the night, asking to be covered or given water or touched, and yet no one in the family remembered those requests in the morning. Had the person actually called, or had it been a spirit impersonating them? Had the dead been reaching out, or the not yet dead? The ambiguity was maddening. There were also the rare cases, thankfully rare, where someone died in their sleep and no one noticed until morning. They were simply gone, stopped breathing sometime in the night. No sound, no struggle, no warning, just silence and a body that was cold by sunrise. These deaths were perhaps the most terrifying because they suggested complete vulnerability. You could be stolen away without warning, without time to prepare, without even the chance to say goodbye. Modern medicine gives us explanations. Bacterial infections, viral diseases, malnutrition, exposure, childbirth complications. We have doctors, antibiotics, hospitals. Back then, you had prayers, herbs, and hope. When modern medicine fails, we at least understand why. When medieval medicine and prayers failed, it was ambiguous. Did you not pray hard enough? Were you not faithful enough? Did a witch specifically target your family? Was it God's will? The lack of answers was its own torment. Perhaps the most profound difference between then and now isn't the actual danger. Childbirth still kills, infection still happens, the body still fails, but our relationship to that danger, we believe we can control it. They knew they couldn't, and they lived with that knowledge, and they survived it, and they maintained community and hope anyway, because survival required more than protection from physical threats. It required managing the mind, controlling anxiety, creating psychological frameworks that made existence possible despite the constant, low-level terror of the night. The medieval mind was a fortress of contradictions, especially at night. You believed in God with absolute certainty, yet you also believed in fairies, demons, witches, and restless dead. These weren't separate worlds, they coexisted, woven so tightly into daily consciousness that questioning one meant questioning all. What happens inside your mind when darkness falls and your only company is your own thoughts, when every shadow might be a spirit and every sound might be your last? As night deepens, your thoughts spiral inward in ways the day never allows. The silence becomes a conversation with yourself, or is it something else speaking? You lie still, eyes open in the dark, listening to your own heartbeat as if it's a clock counting down to something inevitable. Your thoughts chase each other. Am I awake or dreaming? Did that shadow move, or did my fear create it? Does that sound real or imagined? The scent of the room sharpens as you settle into stillness, straw beneath you releasing its earthy mustiness, smoke from the dying fire curling around you like ghostly fingers that might or might not be real. The air tastes faintly of salt, from your own skin perhaps, or from the moisture that always seems to cling to stone walls. Sometimes you taste fear itself, metallic, sharp, acidic. You hear everything now. The creak of timber that might be settling or might be footsteps, a whisper of wind that could be the breeze, or could be something calling your name in a voice just barely human, too deep to be living, too clear to be wind. Your ears strain so hard they ring with the pressure of listening, of trying to distinguish threat from normal. The texture of anxiety is peculiar. Your skin prickles, not from cold but from anticipation. Every hair seems to stand on end. Your blanket, rough though it is, becomes a barrier between you and the vast unknown. You pull it higher, even though you know cloth stops neither spirit nor witch nor the creeping dread that seems to seep through walls. Your soul, your very essence, feels thin and vulnerable. Medieval theology, reinforced by priests and elders, taught that sleep was when the soul wandered. During waking hours, your soul stayed safely tethered, but sleep loosened those bonds. Your soul might wander to places it shouldn't go. It might encounter things. It might be delayed in returning. Some nights you fight sleep desperately, terrified of where your spirit might wander, afraid it won't find its way home before dawn. Other nights, exhaustion wins, you surrender, hoping, praying fervently that your soul finds its way home before the sun rises and traps you in the wrong world. Emotionally, you oscillate between terror and a strange, almost delicious anticipation. Part of you expects something to happen. Part of you is almost disappointed when morning comes without incident. This emotional whiplash was constant, the dread never fully fading, never fully confirming itself. The uncertainty itself becomes a kind of torture. You've heard so many stories that your imagination is stocked with material. The widow who woke to find a specter sitting on her chest, stealing her breath until she thought her lungs would explode. The child who spoke in tongues after a night visit from a demon. The farmer who swore a fairy had stolen his daughter and left a changeling, a creature that looked like his daughter but wasn't in her place. These weren't cautionary tales whispered casually. They were neighborhood news, as real as rainfall, as verified as anything could be in a world with limited verification systems. Some nights, you try to reason with yourself. It's just the wind. It's just an animal. Nothing happened last night. Nothing will happen tonight. Logic is a thin shield against 1,000 years of collective terror passed down through generations, embedded in culture and belief. But you wield it anyway, knowing it probably won't work, using it anyway. Humor serves as a pressure valve. You joke internally about curses, about witches with better manners than the village gossip, about ghosts who were probably as scared of you as you were of them. The jokes are dark and desperate, but they create moments of lightness, reminding you that you're still sane, still alive, still part of the world of the living and thinking and joking. Can you imagine a mind constantly processing threat, constantly in a state of low-level anxiety, constantly uncertain about what's real and what's imagined? Is that torture, or is that just how humans survived when the world genuinely was more dangerous? What rituals did your ancestors use to keep the night at bay, and did they truly work? Or was the real magic simply the belief itself, the community commitment to a shared protective framework? As evening falls and the light begins its inevitable fade, the first ritual begins. Someone, usually the eldest woman or the village priest if you're fortunate enough to have one nearby, or sometimes a respected elder, begins the prayers. Not casual, distracted prayers, but specific incantations passed down through generations, each word chosen deliberately, each phrase serving a purpose. The words are Latin mixed with the local tongue, instructions to saints and angels, urgent pleas for protection through the dangerous dark hours. The sound of collective prayer is haunting and beautiful, simultaneously voices rising and falling in rhythm, almost musical in their coordination. The smell of candles intensifies as more are lit, thin spirals of smoke carrying prayers upward toward heaven or wherever prayers go. Beeswax candles if you're wealthy, tallow if you're not, either way. The smoke curls thickly through the air, visible proof that your prayers are ascending, carrying your words to whatever powers might listen. Then come the physical protections, the tangible shields, iron nails, blessed if possible, at least touched by someone holy, if blessing isn't available, are hammered into door frames with deliberate strikes. Why iron specifically? Because iron was cold and hard and eternal. Because it predated Christianity, having power in older belief systems. Because tradition held it effective, and tradition, after centuries of use, had acquired its own power through collective belief and repetition. You feel the roughness of the nail heads, sense the solidity they represent. Salt, pure white salt, is poured in careful lines beneath windows and doors, creating boundaries, creating barriers that supposedly cross-species beings cannot cross. The salt creates patterns, geometric shapes, and protective formations. The scent of salt mingles with smoke and herbs, creating an almost medicinal smell that somehow feels safer than the musty darkness. Herbs, the herbs are the gardener's gift to the frightened. Rosemary for remembrance and protection, tied in bundles with twine. Lavender for peace and calm, though the calmness is often short-lived once the dark truly comes. Street, John's wort, because it supposedly burned witches from a distance, creating an invisible barrier they couldn't penetrate. You tie these into careful bundles with twine, hang them above sleeping areas in specific patterns. The dried herbs release their fragrance as warmth reaches them, a pungent, almost medicinal smell that feels like armor, like proof that you're doing something, that you're not simply waiting passively for disaster. Amulets are worn, wooden crosses worn smooth from generations of nervous fingers, small pouches containing blessed bread and salt, coins stamped with saints' images. You touch yours now, feeling the weight of collective hope around your neck. Is it protection, or is it placebo? Does the distinction matter if it lets you sleep? Sometimes you examine it in daylight, wondering if it's truly efficacious or if the power comes entirely from your belief. But at night, in the dark, you never question, you simply hold it, press it against your skin, trust in its power. Some families perform a ritual called crossing the threshold, where the youngest child is carried across the doorway while specific words are spoken, a symbolic sealing, a magical contract that spirits are not welcome here, that this space is protected, that the beings of the night cannot cross without invitation. Children, the theory held, were most vulnerable, their souls not yet fully anchored to their bodies, so protecting them meant speaking in older languages, using older names for God that predated Christianity itself, calling on powers that existed before the church claimed dominion. Emotionally, these rituals are profound in ways that extend beyond the supernatural. They're not just protective, they're communal, they're ancestral, they're proof that you're not alone in your fear. Thousands before you have trembled at night. Thousands before you have used these same words, these same objects, these same gestures. You're part of a chain of survival, stretching back through time, forward into the future. The ritual connects you to your ancestors and to your descendants, creating continuity and purpose. Some families kept a spirit stone, a naturally smooth rock supposedly fallen from heaven, kept near the bed. Its touch was meant to ground you, to keep your soul anchored to your body during sleep, to prevent your spirit from wandering too far into the dangerous night spaces. Other families had blessed oil to anoint the forehead, a final act before closing the eyes, a blessing given and received, a transfer of protection from the family to the individual sleeper. The humor in all this? You never spoke it aloud. It was too serious, too sacred, too necessary. But internally, you might wonder, if all these protections work, why are we still terrified? Yet the answer was always the same, because the night is ancient, older than Christianity, older than civilization, older than human memory. The night is powerful because it's eternal. Practical details meant something too. The specific order of rituals mattered. Prayers first, then physical protections, then personal amulets, then and only then could sleep come safely. Break the order, and you risk leaving a gap, a weak point through which something might slip. Every step was insurance, ritual, and a family's collective love given material form. The repetition was key. Every night the same rituals, every night the same words. Every night the same objects are positioned the same way. The repetition created grooves in reality, so to speak, neural pathways in your mind that associated these actions with safety, with mourning, with survival. Your brain learned that ritual equals safety, and your nervous system began to calm when the familiar patterns began. Modern bedtime is often solitary meditation, maybe a sleep app, playing soothing sounds, maybe journaling, maybe medication. Medieval bedtime was a collective ceremony, a reaffirmation that your community, your family, your entire lineage stood between you and chaos. Which provides better rest, technology, or togetherness? Rituals matter not because they change reality, but because they change us. Medieval people understood this intuitively, even if they didn't have words for psychology and neuroscience. We might have forgotten, in our rush toward rational materialism, what ritual actually provides. But beyond the rituals and the common fears, there were rare, strange occurrences, tales that even the skeptical couldn't fully dismiss, stories that made the night feel even more alive with possibility and threat. Every village had its strange story, the unexplained event that no ritual quite explained, the mystery that haunted people for decades afterward, the tale that even skeptics couldn't quite rationalize away. These were the stories whispered by firelight, the ones that made you wonder if you truly knew the world around you, the ones that suggested boundaries between worlds might be thinner than believed. There was, for instance, the story of the Beltane burning, not the safe, controlled Beltane ritual performed by priests, but the wild one that sometimes happened in spring when farmers set fires to clear fields. During these times, entire villages reported seeing lights dancing in the fields at night, moving in patterns too coordinated to be simple fire, too purposeful to be wind. Were they fairies celebrating? Were they wandering souls seeking warmth? Were they something else entirely? No one could agree, and the mystery had persisted for generations. Then there was the case of the changeling children, infants, who seemed normal at birth, but by their 3rd month showed signs of otherness. They wouldn't cry normally. Their cries sounded wrong, as if produced by something learning to mimic human sound. Their eyes held too much knowledge for their age. Their mothers swore with absolute certainty that these weren't their own children, that fairies had stolen their real babies and left these substitutes in their place. Some of these strange children survived to adulthood, showing increasing oddness with age. Others simply stopped, as if the stolen child's borrowed time had expired. One old woman in every village claimed to remember the old ways before Christianity, before saints and crosses. She'd whisper about the spirit paths, about nights when the boundaries between worlds thinned like worn cloth, about how your ancestors had managed the darkness before the church offered its particular solutions. Whether she was genuinely ancient or merely seemed so through repetition and mystique, you never knew. Her voice, thin and papery, felt like it came from another century, another world entirely. The most disturbing reports involved the night walkers, people who supposedly left their beds in the darkness, walked for hours in a trance, and returned without memory of their journey. Had witches stolen them temporarily? Had demons possessed them? Or was it simply the mind playing tricks in the vulnerable hours before dawn, the body moving while consciousness slept? No one could say, but entire families reported finding loved ones missing in the morning, only to have them return before sunset, with no recollection of where they'd been. One family reported that their son came home one night covered in frost. Though it was summer, he spoke of dancing in a hall of ice with a beautiful woman who had too many fingers on each hand. He recovered eventually, but was never quite right afterward. He'd sometimes stop mid-sentence and listen to something no one else could hear, as if he were still partially in that other place, still hearing that other world. Some medieval scholars actually documented these phenomena, trying to categorize whether they were demonic, divine, or simply misunderstood natural events. The confusion itself became the most unsettling part. Even educated men couldn't explain what was happening, couldn't create a rational framework that contained all the evidence. Some things simply didn't fit into available categories. Was the village wise woman a healer or a witch? When herbs cured someone, was it medicine or magic? When someone got worse despite treatment, was it her fault or fate's? And how did the line between helping and harming become so impossibly blurred in the medieval night? Every village had one, the woman who knew things. She knew which herbs brought fever down, which ones helped with childbirth, which ones might induce sleep or prevent it. She knew how to set bones, how to stitch wounds, how to deliver babies when the delivery went wrong. She was called upon in emergencies, paid in goods or labor, respected in daylight. But at night, when someone fell mysteriously ill, the same woman's knowledge took on different coloration. What if she'd given you the evil eye instead of helping? What if her muttered words while preparing remedies were curses rather than incantations? What if her touch brought sickness instead of health? The fear of her power and the need for her knowledge existed in constant, uncomfortable proximity. The scent associated with her was complex medicinal herbs mixed with something else, something indefinable that might have been age or might have been otherness. When she visited, the smell of her remedies preceded her pungent, sometimes acrid, sometimes sweet, but in an unsettling way. You wanted her help and feared it simultaneously. She lived slightly apart from others, often on the village edge. Her home contained things others didn't have: bottles, dried herbs hanging in bundles, unusual objects, books if she was unusually educated. Her presence brought comfort and dread in equal measure. She might save your life or curse you. The boundary between salvation and damnation seemed to depend on factors you didn't understand. The emotional complexity was profound. You needed her. Your entire family might depend on her knowledge. Yet the same knowledge that made her valuable also made her suspicious. Why did she know so much? How had she gained such power? Was it through learning or through pacts with darker forces? The questions were never asked directly. That would be rude, would be dangerous, but they hung in the air whenever she was discussed. Her relationship with the church was always complicated. Priests needed her too, but wanted to control her. She was called a wise woman or wise one, terms that were almost complimentary. But wise woman could slide easily into witch if things went wrong, if someone she treated died anyway, if events took an unfortunate turn. The line between valued and condemned was razor thin. You've heard stories about what happened to wise women in other villages. One was driven out when someone died and they decided she was responsible. Another was actually executed when a child's death was attributed to her curse. Another simply disappeared, whether she fled or was taken. No one quite knew. The lesson was clear. The wise woman's knowledge was valuable but dangerous, that her presence was necessary but precarious, that she held power but no real protection. At night, when you thought of her, it was with ambivalence. If someone in your family fell ill, you'd want her called. If the illness worsened anyway, you'd wonder if she'd caused it. The same hands that might heal you might also harm you. The question was always, which version of her was helping you tonight? Which version of her power was being deployed? Did she even know the difference? Some villages had more than one wise woman, creating a kind of balance. If one seemed to accumulate too much power, or if her treatments failed too often, people might shift their loyalty to another. The competition between them was subtle but real, played out in herbal knowledge, in successful treatments, in the testimonies of people who'd been healed. The practical reality was that these women often did possess genuine knowledge. They knew which plants were effective for various ailments. They had experience with childbirth and wounds and common illnesses. Their treatments sometimes worked, and sometimes they didn't exactly like modern medicine, except without our ability to understand why. When a remedy worked, it was proof of her power and knowledge. When it failed, it was proof she'd been cursed or had cursed the patient or hadn't been sufficiently faithful in her practices. Modern doctors are trusted because they operate within a system of understanding. We know why antibiotics work, how surgery functions, why certain treatments help. Back then, the wise woman operated in ambiguity. Her knowledge worked sometimes, didn't work other times, and no one could explain why. This fundamental uncertainty made her simultaneously absolutely necessary and absolutely dangerous. Perhaps the wise woman represents something important about how humans relate to knowledge and power. She had both, and both made people uncomfortable. We fear what we don't understand, even when we desperately need it. As night deepens, and rituals are performed, and protection is layered upon protection, there remains one more element to consider. How did medieval people balance their Christian faith with these older, deeper beliefs? Medieval faith wasn't clean or simple. It was a blend: Christianity on top, pagan beliefs underneath, practical superstition woven through everything. How did you navigate a spiritual landscape where contradictions weren't resolved but simply coexisted? You believed in God? Absolutely. The church taught you that God was all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good. God would protect you if you were faithful, if you prayed correctly, if you lived righteously. This was the theology of daylight. But you also believed in older things. Fairies were real. Witches had genuine power. Spirits of the dead lingered in the night. Salt worked, iron worked. Certain words, spoken in certain ways, had power independent of God's will. These beliefs were the theology of night, inherited from your grandparents and their grandparents, predating the church by generations. The two belief systems occasionally contradicted each other. If God was all-powerful, how could a witch have power? If God protected the faithful, why did faithful people die anyway? If prayer was enough, why was salt needed? Why iron? Why herbs and amulets? But most medieval people didn't experience these as contradictions, they experienced them as layers. God was the highest power, the ultimate authority, but beneath God's attention, other forces operated. God might be too busy managing the cosmos to notice every individual witch or demon. God might work through secondary causes, through the properties of salt, through the power of words, through the inherent properties of certain objects. Or perhaps God simply allowed these secondary forces to exist as a test of faith. The smell of incense in the church mixed with the scent of herbs at home. The cross you wore around your neck sat next to a small pouch containing salt and blessed bread. These weren't contradictory, they were layers of protection, approaches that might work separately or together, insurance policies purchased on multiple fronts. Emotionally, this blended belief gives you flexibility. If prayer alone didn't work, you could add ritual. If the ritual alone didn't work, you could add a community ceremony. If the ceremony didn't work, you could consult the wise woman. If that didn't work, you could try something else. The multiplicity of approaches meant you were never truly without options, never truly without hope. Priests didn't always approve of the older practices, but they were pragmatic. Better to turn a blind eye to protective salt than have a parishioner lose faith entirely. Better to let people keep their amulets than have them abandon Christianity. So an uneasy peace existed. The church officially condemned superstition, but informally tolerated it. People used both systems simultaneously, without guilt or sense of contradiction. If you believed in something strongly enough, did it matter whether it was real in a modern sense? Did it matter whether salt actually repelled spirits or simply calmed your nervous system, making sleep possible? Not all medieval nights were equally terrifying. Winter nights and summer nights, though both dangerous, felt different. How did the seasons reshape the medieval fear of darkness? Winter nights were the worst, the terror of darkness combined with the terror of cold. The darkness lasted longer, sometimes 18 hours or more. Your body aches from the cold constantly. Animals pressed against each other for warmth. You all huddled together, and the night felt endless. But summer presented a different problem. The darkness was brief, which should have been comforting, but the short darkness was more mysterious somehow. Things happened in the twilight hours that weren't quite night but weren't quite day. The boundaries blurred. Creatures that belonged to neither world moved freely in the in-between times. Some feared summer nights more than winter nights precisely because the rules seemed less stable. Spring nights brought Beltane rituals, when the boundaries between worlds supposedly thinned most dramatically. Livestock was driven through bonfires. People gathered in unusual configurations. The normal protections seemed less effective when the normal rules of reality were supposedly suspended. Autumn nights carried a particular melancholy, the dying of the year, the retreat of warmth, the preparation for the long winter to come. You felt mortality more acutely in autumn nights, sensed the proximity of death as the world itself seemed to be dying. Some villages specifically timed important events to occur during particular seasons to either maximize or minimize supernatural interference. A child born in summer faced different spiritual challenges than one born in winter. How did medieval night fears compare to other eras? Did ancient Rome fear the dark differently? Did ancient Egypt have different demons? And what does this tell us about fear itself? The Romans, centuries before your time, had a similar dread but different villains. They feared the lemurs' vengeful ghosts of those who died violently or without proper burial. Yet their response was more structured, more bureaucratic. Specific rituals on specific dates, almost like administrative management of the supernatural. The Parentalia festival in February was explicitly designed to placate the restless dead. The Romans created a calendar of supernatural management. In ancient Egypt, night wasn't feared the same way it was necessary, even sacred. The sun god Ra traveled through the underworld each night, and Egyptian people believed they too journeyed spiritually alongside Ra in his battles against chaos. The night was frightening but purposeful. They helped the sun god through sympathetic magic-making noise, burning offerings, participating spiritually in Ra's nightly battle against the serpent Apophis, who threatened to swallow the sun and plunge the world into eternal darkness. Your medieval fear, though it had a unique flavor, it combined the Roman dread of restless dead with Christian anxiety about demons and witches. It layered pagan ritual with ecclesiastical doctrine. You lived at a crossroads of beliefs, each trying to explain and combat the same basic terror. The Romans compartmentalized their fear. The Egyptians spiritualized it. You lived with it, wove it into daily practice, made it part of the fabric of existence. The scent of history, metaphorically speaking, was different in each era. Ancient Rome smelled of incense and marble, ancient Egypt of myrrh and papyrus. Your medieval night smelled of herbs and salt and smoke, a more earthbound, more desperate scent, less cosmic, more intimate. The sounds differed too. A Roman forum at night had guards and structure. An Egyptian temple had priests chanting through the hours, maintaining cosmic order through sound. Your village had ordinary people clutching ordinary talismans, praying ordinary prayers, hoping ordinary luck would see them through. There was something almost democratic about your fear. It wasn't managed by a specialized priesthood or by cosmically significant beings. It was managed by your family, your community, your own hands and voices. Emotionally, though, you all shared something, the primal human fear of darkness and the unknown. Different cultures dressed it in different clothes, but the fear was ancient and universal. You were connected across centuries by terror, by the need for light, by the refusal to accept that the night was simply night. All humans seemed to need to make the night meaningful, whether through identifying demons, gods, or spirits. Practically speaking, medieval Europe had a unique problem. Rural, sparse populations meant fewer sources of light, more isolation, deeper forests. Previous civilizations had cities with streets and guards. You had villages where forests pressed close enough to whisper at the walls. You had distances measured in hours of travel, not minutes. You had isolation that previous eras, concentrated in cities, might not have fully experienced. Here's where humor finds purchase. Medieval Europeans, in their anxiety, kept trying to solve the problem through accumulation. More prayers? Try more prayers. More protections? Add another layer. More ritual? Get the priest involved. Ancient cultures seemed to accept the night as a part of cosmic order. Medieval culture treated it as a problem to be managed, a threat to be negotiated with constantly. This reflects something about medieval Christianity, a sense that the world wasn't naturally safe, that constant vigilance and prayer were necessary, that evil was active and present. Today you might fear nuclear war or climate change, future threats, abstract threats, systemic threats. Medieval people feared immediate, visible darkness and the creatures real and imagined it might contain. Which fear is more rational? Perhaps both are rational for their respective times, each reflecting genuine dangers relevant to the era. The night itself hasn't changed much. Stars still shine, darkness still falls, humans still feel vulnerable. We've pushed the darkness back with electricity and technology, but we still feel its pull, still tell stories about what might lurk in it, still maintain that some part of us expects danger when the sun sets. And so we arrive at the final understanding, the accumulation of all these fears, rituals, and struggles, and what they meant for a person trying to simply sleep, to simply survive, to simply continue. What have we learned by stepping into the shoes of medieval people as night fell? We've walked through stone cottages where cold pressed against skin like a living thing. We've heard the prayers whispered in darkness, felt the weight of amulets around necks, tasted the fear that came with every shadow. We've understood that the night wasn't just an absence of light, it was a presence, a force, a character in the story of survival. Medieval people lived with a paradox we've largely forgotten. They were simultaneously more aware of their vulnerability and more willing to accept it. They didn't fight the night with electricity or sedatives. They fought it with community, with ritual, with the stubborn human refusal to surrender to terror. Every prayer was an act of defiance. Every amulet was a declaration. I am still here, and I will see tomorrow. The spirits they feared, were they real? In a sense, yes. They were real in the collective imagination, real in the way fear shapes behavior, real in the way a culture can create its own reality through shared belief. A witch might have been a woman who knew herbs and talked to herself. A demon might have been fever dreams, or the sound of wind in the eaves. A fairy might have been a stranger in the woods, or a half-remembered story, or simply the deep human need to populate the darkness with something other than emptiness. But here's what matters. These fears taught medieval people something valuable. They learned that the community saves. They learned that ritual matters, not because it changes physics, but because it changes psychology, changes neurology, changes the actual architecture of the nervous system. They learned that vulnerability shared is vulnerability diminished. They learned to hold both terror and humor in the same breath, to laugh at the darkness while still respecting it. How has this changed our understanding of them? Perhaps we've realized that medieval people weren't primitive or foolish. They were us, experiencing the same world with different tools. They were scientists of fear, philosophers of darkness, engineers of comfort. They built entire systems of belief and practice to address the fundamental human terror of the unknown. And those systems worked not perfectly, not always, but enough to let them sleep, to let them wake, to let them continue living and creating and loving despite the night. We might also understand that we haven't truly solved the problem they faced. We've simply traded one set of anxieties for another. They feared spirits in the night. We fear messages on our phones at 3 a.m. They couldn't sleep because of dread. We can't sleep because of screens. They clutched crosses. We clutch sleep apps and weighted blankets. The technology changes, but the fundamental human need remains. We want to feel safe enough to rest. Medieval people remind us that safety is partly physical, but largely psychological. It's a story we tell ourselves, a ritual we perform, a community we trust. It's the knowledge that others have survived this before. It's the belief that tomorrow will come. It's the acceptance that some things are unknown and can coexist with that knowledge. In our modern world of rational science and controlled environments, we've forgotten something medieval people knew instinctively, that meaning matters, that ritual matters, that community matters, that sometimes the things we believe in work not because they change reality, but because they change us. And when we change, when our nervous system relaxes, when our mind accepts safety, our sleep improves, our health improves, our ability to face the next day improves. Return now, for a moment, to the central truth of this story. Medieval people faced genuine hardship, cold, disease, isolation, uncertainty, threats both real and imagined. And yet, they persisted. They created meaning from fear. They built families, grew food, created art, made music, told stories, loved each other, raised children. They lived full lives despite the darkness, not because they conquered it, but because they learned to live alongside it. When you lie in bed tonight, safe and warm and surrounded by light at the flip of a switch, remember that somewhere in your ancestry, someone survived a medieval night. Someone clutched a cross and whispered prayers. Someone held a child through the dark hours. Someone woke at dawn relieved and exhausted and grateful. Someone endured what we can barely imagine. That person's courage, their quiet, ordinary, daily courage, lives in you. It's written in your genes, encoded in your cells, present in your capacity to survive and continue. The spirits didn't get them. The witches didn't steal their souls. The demons didn't take them in the night. They survived through community, through ritual, through the simple refusal to give in to terror. And so might you, and so do you, every night, in your own way, continuing a tradition of survival that stretches back through centuries. As this story draws to its close, picture this. It's just before dawn in a medieval cottage. The fire has burned low, casting red embers that glow like eyes in the darkness. The family still sleeps, tangled together, breathing in rhythm. Outside, the world is beginning its slow shift, the night creatures retreating into the shrinking shadows, the day creatures stirring, preparing for their own battles. Birds tentatively begin their songs, the first notes of dawn chorus starting quietly, building momentum. Soon, someone will rise. Water will be fetched. Fires will be tended. Animals will be fed. Children will need breakfast. The day will demand its due, and people will meet those demands as they always have. But for now, there's a moment of pause, of quiet, of safety just barely maintained until the sun returns and burns away the night's terrors. This is where we leave you, in that liminal space between night and day, between fear and relief, between the terror of darkness and the promise of morning. Hold this moment. Breathe in it. Let the weight of the medieval night settle gently on your thoughts, not as burden, but as context, as history, as proof that humans have always found ways to rest despite their fears, always found ways to create safety through community and ritual and belief. You've journeyed through fear with medieval people. You've felt their cold, heard their prayers, understood their rituals. You've walked beside them through the darkest hours and arrived, as they did, in the morning. And just as they survived, so do you, night after night, day after day, continuing forward through time. Let your own bed be your sanctuary now. Let your pillows be soft. Let the knowledge that you are safe in this moment, this particular, this actual, this real moment wash over you like warm water. The night that terrified medieval people still exists, still surrounds us, still presses against windows and doors, but you have barriers they couldn't imagine: electricity, insulation, knowledge, medicine. Use them without guilt, rest without fear, and when you wake tomorrow, carry with you the quiet strength of those who survived before you. Carry the knowledge that humans are resilient. Carry the understanding that the community sustains. Carry the gentle wisdom that fear, while real, is survivable. Carry the hope that dawn always comes. May your sleep be deep and dreamless, or filled with kind dreams of stone cottages and stars and the gentle breathing of loved ones beside you. May you wake refreshed, ready for whatever your day brings. May you carry forward, in your own way, the quiet courage of those medieval people who faced the night and refused to be defeated by it. Thank you for walking this path with me, for spending this time in the medieval dark, for being present with fear and ritual and the beautiful, fragile persistence of human life, for listening, for caring enough to hear these stories of people long gone but never truly absent. Sleep now, rest now, dream if you will. The morning will come, it always does, and you, like your ancestors before you, will wake and continue